Hello again, everybody. It's Ursula Barry here from UCD. And today I'm going to concentrate on three questions. The way in which unpaid work is at the heart of the care economy, looking at some of the costs and conditions of the care sector in Ireland, and then going back to the question of principles and perspectives on change. Okay, so I want to start by saying that unpaid work is at the heart of the global economy, as well as the Irish economy. And it has the same features everywhere. The care work is mostly unpaid or low paid. And care work carries little recognition or value in the public system. It's mainly carried out by women. And some of the things that arise is the question of why is this the case? And one of the reasons for this is the way the economic system to which every country that is part of the United Nations is attached to. It's called the UN system of the national accounts. And under this global system, we measure GNP, gross national product, and gross domestic product. And we measure, each country measures this under the same kind of rule-based system. But what is measured when we measure GNP and GDP is only market-based economic activity that carries, that passes through the market and therefore carries a price. And in that sense, value is conflated to price or made equal to price. So in this classical economic model, which has been in place since the 1930s, many activities are not counted. For example, subsistence agriculture for the immediate consumption of a household, that's not counted because it doesn't go through the marketplace. Household activity which are unpaid, or community and volunteering activities unpaid, that's not counted either. So there's a range of activities that are not counted or unpaid, and you can see them as actually excluded or hidden. So there's consequences to that, because policy priorities are based on mainstream economic statistics, which are both narrow and highly gendered. And as I said, value is reduced to price, and valuable activities that are unpaid are not counted. So therefore, a significant amount of women's work is devalued. And it's also important to recognize the scale of the unpaid labor in the world economy. And this is a slide from the International Labour Organization, and it will show you that 3 in 4 people performing unpaid care work are women. And the pace of change is so slow that in order to get a 50-50 split between women and men in carrying out unpaid work, it'll take 210 years. So that's a long time. And it's also interesting to consider the different kinds of unpaid work that there are. You can look at caring for children inside and outside the home, elder care provided by community-based services like Meals on Wheels, full-time carers, looking after those with disabilities, and the respite care that maybe draws on the voluntary sector. All of those are examples of unpaid work. And if we look at this time spent in unpaid work by men and women, and the dark bar here is women and the light bar is men, you can see that Ireland, Italy and Portugal have the highest proportion of women engaged in unpaid work, and also the proportion of women as opposed to men carrying out unpaid work. So women, for example, do 3 times more housework than men per week in Ireland. In practice, in Irish and global societies, there is a significant care penalty. Women earn lower incomes and access fewer economic and social supports during their lifetime. So the lack of recognition for care links to a structural dependency for women, because without earning independent income, dependency is one of the consequences. And there's also reduced lifetime earnings and pension entitlements, a narrow range of educational and employment opportunities, greater risk of poverty, both as lone parents and in old age, and less control over time. And there are some very stark gendered figures out there. 98% of full-time carers are women. 95% of those categorized as adult dependents in the social protection system are women. The contributory state pension, 84% of recipients are men, whereas the non-contributory state pension, 66% of the recipients are women. And it's estimated that 2.7 billion worth of tax relief on pensions is recorded annually, and yet just 1.7 billion is paid out in the state non-contributory pension. But it's also true to say that rigid roles are failing men also. Men in general may benefit from the unequal division of labour, but Rigid gender roles result in men's kind of separation or disengagement from care and caring. And it also means a low priority is attached to supporting men within our caring system and within our policy system. And all those have consequences which men are contesting increasingly. Now, I want to just look at the costs and conditions in the care sector. And as I said, social policies on care are largely based on unpaid family care and based on the private market. Many households provide care services themselves because the costs in the market are increasingly prohibited. Those who can pay often rely on the private marketplace, and that's created new kinds of inequalities in Irish society. And to look at it in comparative ways, this is an EU comparative table, and it shows you that on Ireland, the net costs of childcare are 28% of net income. In the EU, it's 12% of net income. Lone parents in Ireland, it's 40% of net income. And you can see that Ireland is way on the highest end of the EU countries, only surpassed by the UK. And if we look, United States and New Zealand are also high there. So historically in Ireland, we have chronic underfunding of early childcare. Ireland allocates just 0.2% of gross domestic product in early childcare, compared to an EU average of 0.8%. And at UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, their target is 1%. And then the care workers themselves, there's low wages in the care sector, lack of a pay scale and career structure. Over 98% of those working in the care sector are women. The room leaders, it's 12.55 euros for a room leader. Assistant staff are 11.46 per week, or sorry, per hour. And average staff turnover is 23%. That's a high turnover. And that compares to currently the minimum wage, which is 10.20, and what's estimated at the living wage in Ireland is 12.30. So at the time the COVID closure happened in March 2020, 61% of childcare workers were working on less than the living wage. And just turning to elder care, 75% of nursing homes are in the private for-profit sector. That came up also during the COVID in the conditions under in the private nursing care sector. Private fees are between 50,000 and 75,000 annually. And on the Fair Deal scheme, you know, older person pays 80% of their income and 7.5% of their assets every year. New legislation is promised to give more priority to home supports, but that hasn't happened yet. At the present time, home care packages are in crisis and the numbers in need are growing every month at this stage. And Ireland is now part of a globalised care chain, which is important also to highlight. Historically, we were an exporter of care. Currently, we import care. And as we understood from our own history, immigrants' remittances are very important for those who are migrants into Ireland, important to their country of origin. So care services increasingly rely on global migrants. And there's issues of pay and conditions, because a lot of this is underground, in the underground economy. And there's a question of regularising the legal status of migrant workers. There's an estimated 20 to 26,000 undocumented migrant workers in Ireland. It's also interesting that the COVID-19 emergency measures that were introduced in the for the childcare sector recognised the importance of keeping the care sector operational in order to keep the economy ticking over. Now, it's recently been announced that the temporary wage subsidy scheme is continuing until the 31st of March in the childcare sector. And it's now providing between 75 and 85% towards the cost of all wages in the childcare sector. And it's also making a contribution to overhead costs. Now, this led to an expectation that fees would be held at pre-COVID levels, but there's evidence that that's not happening in practice. So the pandemic emergency measures meant that private providers have kept childcare businesses open with the support of the state. But this does not address costs to parents and the low wages and conditions among employees. And in practice, there is a continuing charging of high fees to privately paying parents. And the question is, what's going to happen on April the 21st, April the 1st, I should say, 2021, when the temporary wage subsidy scheme comes to an end? It's kind of unthinkable at this stage. So perspectives on and principles of change, I think, just to say briefly here, the existing model is a state subsidization or payment for private service delivery. And the current system, the current support an unequal gendered system of care provision with low level of state support. And that's not in the interest of either women or men. So we need a new model of care supporting different ways of managing and organising care. And the key principles should recognise care as a social investment, and the state support for quality care system for child, disability and elder care. We need to recognise different needs of different households, to support different choices of different households, and respect the autonomy of adult care recipients. So in the long term, we need state responsibility and the public provision of quality, universal, basic care services. And that will lead to decreased reliance on the market, increased public provision with better wages and a more flexible approach. It should result in facilitating combining care and unpaid employment, encouraging greater male participation in care, removing the care penalty on women, improving the economic situation of care workers, and protecting migrant workers in the care services. So the things that I would be recommending is that to carry out a gender impact assessment every year of the budget that is introduced annually, to carry out a national timing survey in order to estimate unpaid work in the Irish context. Secondly, to introduce a universal pension entitlement and remove the concept of dependency from the social protection system and benchmark that pension to 35% of average earnings. And then recognise care by allowing those seeking part-time work to access job seekers' payments. So in the short term, I would envisage that all care workers should be on at least on the, at a minimum, on the living wage. And a career structure should be developed for care workers. From 0.2% to 0.5% should be invested in early childhood and care in the medium term. And the income disregard for carers that are allowed to earn income outside of the tax system should be raised to 18,000 euros per annum. In the long term, the career structure for care sector would have to be implemented. 1% should be invested in early childhood, and the income disregard should be increased to 20,000. That disregard allows for a much more flexible approach to the way in which care is provided, whether it's provided in the home or in socialized settings. So that's it, and thank you very much for listening. You'll get a chance to discuss the different recommendations and perspectives on change in the groups. Thanks very much.